Hi, everybody. Dennis Brown here. And today I'm going to ask you a very important question. It is the number one question that every freight broker needs to answer. Every freight broker startup needs to answer. I should rephrase that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Thank you for joining me. This is my weekly Freight Broker Bootcamp Live. And, I do these every week, Mondays at noon. But today's Tuesday. I had to reschedule yesterday. I apologize for the delay, but I'm back. And today we're going to have, here's the agenda. We're going to go through the training. It's going to be a short training. And then we may do a giveaway and we may do a short Q&A. Time is a little bit strained on my end, but I'll do my best to try to deliver. And unfortunately, I had a little bit of an absent memory here and forgot to send out the reminder email until probably about 1 minute before you saw me go live. Okay. So a lot of people are just getting reminded right now that we are going live. So we're going to wait a few minutes to get people live on the stream. And then we'll do some shout outs. We'll jump into the training, maybe do a giveaway, hopefully do some Q&A, and then we will go from there. Okay. So we've got some people that are joining us already. That's good news. We got Cynthia from Maryland. Welcome, Cynthia. Matthew from Spokane, Washington. John Heller from Johnstown, PA. Yeah, and as you come into the stream, hit me up in the comments. Let me know the city and state that you're logged in from. I'd love to hear from you. And again, today, for those of you that may not have heard, I've got a lot of notes to go over. This is a lot. And we're going to talk about the number one question that every freight broker startup needs to answer. All right, so I'm going to leave you in a little bit of mystery and anticipation there. I want you to hang tight with me. We are going to jump into the training shortly. For those of you, this is your first time and you're just joining in. My name is Dennis Brown. I've been an entrepreneur since 1994. This is a really long time, almost 30 years. And during that time, I've been very blessed. I built 4 multi-million-dollar companies in 4 different industries. I started a freight brokerage, which was one of them back in 2003, grew that company, did over $200 million as a freight broker, sold that business. But I'm also the owner of freightbrokerbootcamp.com, the most cost-effective and comprehensive online freight broker and freight agent training program. Trained over 10,000 students. It's probably closer to 20, but I stopped counting. And we offer a 60-day, 100% unconditional money-back guarantee. So if you guys are curious about becoming a freight broker or a freight agent, you can check that out at freightbrokerbootcamp.com. And I do these trainings weekly. Okay, these are free trainings that I do weekly. Let's jump into some shout outs. We've got Victor from Los Angeles. We've got Nextlinks from Valley Stream, New York. We got Anthony from Burlington, Vermont. Corey from Billings, Montana. Guy from Eureka, Montana. I love it. Petula from Las Vegas, Nevada. Fateh from Charlotte, North Carolina. Jose from Camarillo, California. Claudia from Rochelle, Illinois. Luke from Moses Lake, Washington. Deshrun from Turnwater, Washington. J.A. Turner 914 at Fayetteville, North Carolina. Annette from Charlotte, North Carolina. Happy Halloween. Saint 710 from Long Beach, California. Angel Fernandez from Lehigh Valley, PA. Usman from Sheridan, Wyoming. Mike Diamond from Chicago, Illinois. So we got a lot of people that are joining us now. I'm happy that you guys were able to make the rescheduled Freight Broker Bootcamp Live. Again, apologize yesterday. I'll just be extremely honest with you. I was feeling a little bit under the weather. I didn't have the right energy. I didn't have the right mindset. And I didn't want to come on here and just give you a half-assed effort. Just being totally honest with you, okay? So I figured it made more sense to reschedule a day, get my energy back up, get my mind in the right place, really think about, which you can see that I did. I put a really thorough outline together today on what I want to go over, and then come in today fresh and kill it like I normally do. So let's do this. I got to make sure that I've got the do not disturb on. I've got my bottle of hint water. And I'm going to take a drink, and then we're going to get the ball rolling here, okay? We got a lot to go over. Before we start, really quick, and then we're going to jump into the training. Hold tight with me, okay? Before we start, how many of you are already members of Freight Broker Bootcamp or the Freight Broker Sales Accelerator? Hit me up in the comments. And then how many of you are thinking about or considering joining the program? Hit me up in the comments and let me know. I'm just curious how many people are already in my program that are here, because it's a little bit different. And then the new people that are just considering joining the program or becoming a freight broker, freight agent, hit me up in the comments really quick. Let me just get a quick survey here of what it looks like. We'll be specific, me and I am, and it's hard for me to tell what that is, right? Annette is a member of both Boot Camp and the Freight Broker Sales Accelerator. Cynthia, member of Sales Accelerator. Awesome. Deshaun already in the program. Corey already in both. Yes. All right. So we got a bunch of people. Okay. Luke. Yep. Gotcha. Cool. So we got a bunch of people that are in the program. Ray's in a hurry. What's up? Teach us something. All right. Okay, guys. So here we go. We're going to take off. Today, I want to share with you the number one question that every freight broker startup needs to answer. Now, when you think about that, there's probably a whole bunch of questions that go through your head. And probably most of them are probably not wrong. They're questions that you need to answer. But there's one that people rarely talk about, and that's the one I want to talk about today. And the question is, what are you willing to sacrifice to be successful as a freight broker? Yes, sacrifice. What are you willing to sacrifice? All right. So I'm going to give you a list of, 5 or 6 different things that I sacrificed and that I've seen other people sacrifice in order to build a successful freight brokerage or freight agency. Now, this really applies to almost all entrepreneurs, but I'm framing it in the concept, or in the realm of freight brokerage and freight agency, because that's why you're here, right? So first, let's talk about number 1, family time. The reality is, when you become an entrepreneur, when you start your freight brokerage or freight agency, you're going to have a lot of good things going on, but you are going to have to compromise some family time. I can tell you that when I first started my freight brokerage back in 2003, the first several years, I missed weddings. I missed all kinds of family events. I missed weddings. I missed birthdays. I missed reunions, right? I missed just parties in general. I mean, I missed some of that family time the first few years, but I was willing to sacrifice those first few years to have a much bigger payoff later, right? So yeah, family time is something that you may have to sacrifice. That's number 1. Number 2, sleep. Yep. Sleep is something that a lot of times entrepreneurs are forced to sacrifice. When I first started back in 2003, I remember I would leave the house by 6 a.m. and most of the time I did not get back until 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And that was 5 or 6 days a week. And when I wasn't in the office, I was thinking about business. I was thinking about the things that I needed to do, right? So even on weekends, I was consumed. So losing sleep, not being able to get, 8 or 10 or 12 hours of sleep, being able to survive on 4 or 5 or 6 hours of sleep sometimes, that's just the reality, right? So you're going to lose some sleep. There's going to be some sleepless nights because of stress. There's going to be some sleepless nights because of worrying. That's just the nature of owning your own business, especially as a startup, right? So that's number 2, sleep. Number 3, a lavish lifestyle, things that a lot of people have gotten really used to. For example, having a new car versus a used car. Okay. If you saw the hoopty that I was driving around in back in 2003, you'd laugh. Okay. It's just the reality. But for me, I wanted to take all of those resources and invest them into my business. So I wasn't driving a brand new Mercedes or a brand new BMW or a brand new F-150 truck. The fact is, I've owned all those since then, but when I first started, I had to sacrifice some of the lavish lifestyle. For some of you, it might mean the difference between renting a home versus buying a home. That's a reality. You may not be in a position to buy for a few years because you have to sacrifice now for the business. Jewelry, right? Vacations. I did not go on vacations. Here, I'll tell you a funny story. Got married in September 27th of 2003. Started my business, incorporated my business on October 3rd, which was 6 days later. Okay. Took a 2 or 3 day honeymoon. And from that point, did not go on vacation didn't even utter the words vacation for 3 or 4 years. And even then, it was more of a weekend type vacation until we got to that 5-year mark, of which things really kind of solidified and cash flowed and had done extremely well. And at that point, I could afford to take a vacation. Okay. So yeah, so lavish lifestyle, those are some things that you might have to sacrifice. Now, here's the reality. Let me clarify one thing. You probably won't have to sacrifice all of these things, but these are some of the things that a freight broker startup is going to have to consider sacrificing. Okay. All right. Number 4, time with your friends. Just like time with your family is precious, but also difficult, time with your friends. Maybe you belong to a bowling league. Maybe you belong to a softball league. Maybe you belong to some sort of social clubs. A lot of times those things are going to go out the window. Those things are going to take a back seat. They're not going to be a priority in the early days of a freight broker startup. So those are things that you have to consider, right? Those are things you have to think about coming in, because here's the reality. And I have a few more. I want you to hang tight. I think I have 4 more, but I want you to understand something. Before you invest a lot of time, energy, resources, money into starting a business, whether that be a freight brokerage or a freight agency or a trucking company or a dispatch company, whatever you're deciding to do, before you do that, you have to do that mental exercise of what am I willing to sacrifice? Because the fact is, every successful entrepreneur sacrifices something along the way, especially in startup days. Okay. All right. So number 5, hobbies. Listen, I remember my first 3 years of my business, 2004, 5, and 6. Judo, hunting, and fishing are my 3 primary hobbies. All right. I've been a black belt in judo for many years. I'm a 3rd-degree black belt. I'm an instructor. I've been a competitor. I've hunted since I've been a teenager, and even before that, bow and gun, and also been fishing since I could walk. So those are lifelong hobbies for me. Those were not easy things to give up, but I didn't do any of those things for the first 3 years of my business. Yes, it was a choice. I was insanely driven. I was very focused, and thus the trade-off made sense. So the reality is you may have to compromise and sacrifice some of your hobbies. Number 7, your health. Listen, I would suggest that you don't sacrifice your health, but a lot of times your health will suffer from being an entrepreneur. Late hours, not getting a lot of sleep, stress, not eating right, not working out. Those are all contributors to your health, negative and positive. And so the reality is, a lot of times there is a little bit of a sacrifice there. Now, not all of these have to be sacrifices. If I were to tell you anyone that you definitely don't want to sacrifice, it's your health. But that would be completely up to you. But even myself, I remember the first few years, I gained 20 pounds because I wasn't doing those hobbies. I wasn't working out. I wasn't eating. I had a lot of stress. But then I realized it and I course corrected and then finally got back into good health. But the reality is, it was a compromise. It was a sacrifice that I was willing to make for those first few years. And then number 8, the security of a weekly paycheck, right? So most of you watching this are currently in or have had a job, right? And the nice thing about those jobs is that every week or every 2 weeks, automatically, there's this deposit that shows up in my bank account, and it's called a paycheck. So the reality is that when you have a W-2 job and you're working for somebody else, that paycheck is typically pretty consistent. 99+% of the time, that check is going to show up on time. It's going to show up in your bank account, and you're going to be able to spend that money. Now, the reality is, as an entrepreneur, unfortunately, you sometimes are the last person to get paid, right? The lights need to stay on, the phone bill needs to be paid, the load boards need to be paid, the carriers need to be paid, everybody needs to be paid, and then you get paid. Now, the great part is, as a freight broker, you've got low startup costs, low overhead, and the reality is, you shouldn't have a huge issue getting paid once you start getting established. But in those first 3 to 6 months, when you're just starting to get your first customers, cash flow can be slow. And so the reality is that predictable paycheck is not going to be nearly as predictable as when working for yourself as it is when you're working for someone else. Okay. So those are 8 things that I want you to consider, but I want you to hang tight with me because I want to share something with you. Don't disappear on me. Those are 8 things. And there are tons of other things that people have sacrificed along the way to be successful in anything in life, but in particular as an entrepreneur, freight broker, freight agent. So I want you to think about that for a second. Consider that. Give it some serious thought, because the real question now that you need to ask yourself is it worth it? Is the sacrifice worth it? Okay. Was the sacrifice worth it? And so I'm going to answer this on a personal level. I can't answer it for you. I'm going to answer it for me. And the answer is yes. All right. Owning my own business has allowed me to take control of my career, take control of my finances, earn way more than any job could ever pay, and gave me the ability to exit multiple businesses where I was able to sell those businesses and then move on to other businesses and other things that I was interested in. For example, my logistics company. I owned that for 13 years, started it with 0, grew it to $80 million a year, and then sold the business. Now I have my Freight Broker Bootcamp online training program that I love, I enjoy, I work on regularly. And so that has become my new focus. But the reality is I've been able to exit. In my career, the sacrifices have been worth it. When I was in the middle of it, hey, listen, like everybody else, there's always those questions in your mind. But the reality is, as a successful entrepreneur, you're going to need to be ready to have sacrifices, okay? But here's the thing I want you to think about. Consider this and lean in really quick, because this is going to probably hit close to home, okay? So lean in for a second and just hear me out. Today, there is no sunset cruise retirement story, okay? Where you retire and you sail off into the sunset. It doesn't exist, all right? When it comes to a job, having a job and a W-2 job and working for someone else, that doesn't exist. The only way that that really exists is for you to own your own business. That's the reality. I mean, think about it. Pensions are pretty much a thing of the past. They're pretty much gone, right? There's really no real tax advantage to a 401k. The reality is you're either going to pay the taxes now or you're going to pay the taxes later. Either way, there's no real advantage. Social Security is insolvent and will probably go away, unfortunately, in the next decade or sooner. And the fact is, you can never exit for a big payday from a job. So the reality is, owning your own business is the only true way to take control of your financial future and to truly retire and have that sunset retirement story, right? So while the sacrifices can be painful and they can be challenging for an early stage entrepreneur, freight broker, freight agent, I wouldn't trade my entrepreneurial journey for anything. The reality is everything has a compromise. You can't have everything today, right? You can have it. It's that old adage, right? You can have everything. You just can't have it all today. And the fact is, sacrifice is going to be a part of that. I hope you guys enjoyed that, but I really want you to think about that before you start your business, before you invest a ton of money. I want you to be ready. Most people are not going to share this with you because these are difficult things to share. These are difficult internal self-reflections that you have to go through. But I want you to do that. And if you are curious about becoming a freight broker, you want to learn the A to Z, and you want to get under the hood, and you really want some help, check out freightbrokerbootcamp.com. Trained over 10,000 students, personally done over $200 million as a freight broker. And we offer a 60-day, 100% unconditional money-back guarantee. So check that out at freightbrokerbootcamp.com. If you guys enjoyed this, do me a huge favor. I don't run any paid ads. You know, everything here is done word of mouth. Do me a huge favor. Hit the like button no matter where you're at. Share the stream. Ask me a question in the comment when we get to the Q&A. Truly appreciate you guys being here. Have an awesome day, and we'll see you next week on a new Freight Broker Bootcamp Live. All right, so hang tight. If you guys are going to stick around for the Q&A, hang tight. But I want to ask some questions. All right. Hold your questions, Papi Chulo, until we do get into the Q&A. Okay. But I want to ask you guys some questions. What are you willing to sacrifice of those 8 things? Family time, sleep, lavish lifestyle, time with friends, hobbies, health, the security of a weekly paycheck. Have you thought about that? Have you thought about the sacrifices you're going to have to make? Hit me up in the comments. Let me know. I really want to know. You know, I'm getting some feedback. Nate says this is on point. I hear freight brokers going through these sacrifices every day. I always tell them to remember their why. Exactly. These sacrifices are really worth it because of your end goal, right? What's driving you? Is it because you want to, you want to retire at 50? Is it, so financial security? Is it because you want to be able to buy your family a new home? Is it because you want to go on great vacations? Is it because you want to pay for your kids' college? Is it because you want to be able to hand down the business to somebody in your family? I mean, what's your why, right? For sure. You got to have that burning why. It can't just be about the money. There's more to it. Okay, cool. So some good feedback. Appreciate the feedback, guys. We're going to skip the giveaway today. I think the Q&A is more valuable. I've been doing a lot of giveaways lately. I've given away money. I've given away here. I've got an idea for you guys. If you guys want a chance to win, hold on a minute. What is it? Hold on a minute. Hold on a minute, guys. Sorry. Never mind. We'll do it. We'll do it another time. All right. So, So let's jump into Q&A, guys. Let's jump into Q&A. So sorry, I'm a little discombobulated here, but let's skip the giveaway for today. Let's jump into Q&A. If you guys have questions, hit me up. I've got a couple questions in here already. Papi Chulo asked, how many realities are there that people in business should already know going or doing business already? All I've learned for 10 minutes is your life, then it's not very productive. Well, Papi Chulo, I'm sorry that you're not happy. You can exit stage left. No problem. If I'm not for you, no worries. But the reality is you're here voluntarily, right? So you can either exit or I'll exit you, whatever you want to do. If you're not happy, whatever. If you found no value, great. I appreciate your feedback. All right, so let's hit me up with questions, guys. Whatever questions you have. Freight broker startup, freight broker sales, lead generation, marketing, rating, whatever's going on in your mind, right? Anything about the Freight Broker Bootcamp training program itself, anything about the Freight Broker Sales Accelerator program, anything you guys have questions about, hit me up and let me know. Okay, Nurse Brittany B asks, do you believe it's better to email or call at this point? I don't think it's an either or. I think it's both. Okay. What I teach is it doesn't have to be either or. That's number one. Number two, what I teach is a multi-channel outreach approach. What I mean by that is I teach using the phone, using LinkedIn, using email, face-to-face when appropriate, right? So I teach a multi-channel. Those are each channels that you can attack. They all have nuances and are slightly different and in slightly different formats. But the reality is, having a multi-channel outreach strategy is going to increase your contact rate, because remember, sales is a contact sport. There are people that don't pick up the phone that will respond via email. There are people that won't respond on email, but will respond on LinkedIn, and vice versa. So the reality is, having a multi-touch point outreach strategy is going to double or triple or sometimes even quadruple the contact rate that you have. Now, that's what I teach in my Freight Broker Sales Accelerator. That's my 5-week coaching program where I take that piece of my brain, I transplant it into your head. I teach you my entire Freight Broker sales system, strategies, tools. And if you guys want to get, that's sold out. You can't enroll in that program right now. But if you guys want to get on the wait list for that program, let me find it. If you want to get on the wait list for the next Freight Broker Sales Accelerator, which will probably launch, well, it'll launch after the first of the year. If you want to get on the wait list, you can check that out at freightbrokerbootcamp.com/waitlist. It's free to get on the wait list. The program is not free. It's not cheap, but it's worth 20x whatever you invest in it. And that's where I get to work with you personally to teach you and help you implement that entire system into your business to help you get shippers, help start driving revenues, especially as an early startup. And so hope that helps. All right. So questions. Oh, they're finally flowing in here. Okay. Claudia, thank you for the kind words. Okay, Anthony says, hello, can you talk about what happened to Convoy? Okay, so for those of you that don't know, Convoy was what has been deemed as a digital freight broker, kind of like an Uber or an Amazon Freight, right? An Uber Freight or Amazon Freight. They're was known as a digital freight broker, where they were really trying to almost trying to take the broker out of the equation, right? Where it became very digitally driven. All right. And so they had raised a shit ton of money. I don't know how much. If I had to guess, 100 million plus, probably 80 to 100 million they raised. I think that's what I remember. They raised a ton of money from venture capital, private equity, that sort of thing, right? So they were highly leveraged with a lot of cash. And the reality is, they just filed bankruptcy. They just went out of business, and the whole industry's up in arms to the reason why. Well, there's probably a lot of reasons why. I don't think it's one main thing. The reality is they were highly leveraged with capital. Some of that was debt, some of that was equity, and the reality is interest rates over the last couple of years have went up really high. So when interest rates goes up on debt, it causes cash flow issues, right? And when interest rates go up from 2 or 3% to 7 or 8%, then you can see how that is going to have a huge impact on your cash flow and debt. Secondly, they had burned through a lot of cash. They were on a scale and grow at all cost strategy where it was billion or bust. I think they did last year, maybe last numbers I heard in 2022, I think they did 800 million in revenue, but they were not profitable. They were losing money. They were hemorrhaging money because they were spending too much money. And this is one of the problems with raising capital. You feel as if you have to deploy that capital and you have to spend that money quickly. And the problem is you fail to create those disciplines inside your business where it comes to acquiring customers cost effectively, the lifetime value of those customers, the retention of those customers. And so they lost control of it. And the reality is they went into a tailspin. The freight market then, from the peak, right? When the market was at its peak in 2021, 2022, and then the freight market started to soften out, and all of a sudden that had a ripple effect. So it was like the perfect storm. They raised too much money. They had too much debt. They spent too much money, and the freight market went soft, and then they're belly up. So, I mean, those are some of the dynamics that I see from the outside in. And there are probably a whole host of reasons of mismanagement, or who knows, possibly fraud or otherwise. I don't know. The reality is we'll never know all the details behind the scene. But the reality is they went back to all their investors. They went back to all their banks. They went back to all their lenders, and those lenders told them no. They were not willing to give them any more money. And I think that says something huge about the digital freight brokerage. And here's the thing. I think one of the major challenges for digital freight brokers is the fact that you start focusing almost exclusively on transactions and very little on relationships. Because the normal day of a freight broker is having conversations with his shippers and carriers. It's that rapport and relationship and trust that they have with both shippers and carriers. And that is the glue that holds everything together. Some people think that it's all about money and it's all about rates, but the reality is it's not. It's about trust. And that trust, people don't trust digital. It just doesn't have that same rapport. It doesn't have that same feel. And so the reality is, I think that the chickens came home to roost and the market has voted, and the market voted that they didn't want that type of business at this time. And I'm not saying that digital freight brokers doesn't have a place, but the reality is a few years ago, in the last 5 years, we've heard a lot about, oh, the digital freight brokers are going to put all the other freight brokers out of business. Well, guess what? We just saw that that's not true. The reality is, if they are successful, and to the date, I don't know any of them that have been successful at running a profitable business. And I think there are going to be other digital freight brokers that are going to go out of business in the next 6, 12, 18 months. That's yet to be seen. But the reality is that's not what's happening. And so, freight brokers are here to stay for the foreseeable future. And as are truck drivers. I mean, that's a whole nother issue, but the whole, driverless truck thing is a big facade. But anyway, that's your answer, Anthony. Hope that helps. I'm glad I was able to get off that rant. Let's see. Okay, so do you think that have any freight brokerage can be an asset to an owner operator running a logistics company? Okay, so the question is, do I think that an owner operator can also own a logistics company freight brokerage? Yes, I do, but it won't be easy. As an owner operator, truck driver, you are the owner and operator, right? So you are the one who's you're the one who's in the truck, driving the truck. And when those wheels aren't moving, you're not making money. So the reality is, you can operate a brokerage from your truck on a part-time basis, as long as you're willing and able to talk to shippers, talk to carriers, learn the system, and operate. Because the fact of the matter is, you have a lot of windshield time, right? As a driver. I mean, it's the definition of your job, windshield time, right? So you drive 100,000 miles a year. Most of that is on highways. And so ultimately, you've got a lot of windshield time. You've got time during normal business hours. And that's what it requires. You have to at least be able to put a part-time effort in during normal business hours, accessing the internet, making and taking calls. And then that is what will be the foundation of your brokerage. The other option is you can try to hire some people to do the brokerage for you, which could be challenging, especially if you don't know how to do it. And then the other option is you move somebody into your truck and they operate the truck, and then you focus on the brokerage. So those are a few different solutions and ideas. Do you think freight brokerage can be a valuable asset to a small fleet? Yes, 100%. Here's why. If you're a small fleet and you own, let's say, 6 trucks, you're limited at any given point to the number of miles and the number of loads that you can haul on those 6 trucks. So let's call that X, right? That's the max revenue you can make with 6 trucks running all the time, 24, just running all the time based on legal hours, okay? So you got 6 trucks, 6 loads moving all the time. Now, let's factor in the brokerage side. You've got customers you're moving freight for. Some of them are freight brokers. Some of them are probably shipper direct. The fact of the matter is, if you were to start a freight brokerage and you have relationships with shippers direct, you have the ability to double, triple, or quadruple or more your revenue, because you're now not limited to just the trucks that you own and control. you have the ability to work with those shippers and outsource and hire other carriers, other owner operators to haul that freight, and you're able to make a margin. You pay them $2,000, or the shipper pays you $2,000. You pay the carrier $1,700 or $1,800. You make $200 or $300 margin. It's not going on your truck, but you were able to make a margin for facilitating that, helping the shipper, helping the carrier. But that allows you to exponentially grow your revenue and profits and do it with less risk. Because the reality is, if you want to add a 7th and an 8th and a 10th and a 20th truck, there's a lot of risk associated with that, right? You got to take out these big loans. You've got to hire drivers. You got to retain drivers. You got to pay all the compliance and licensing and insurance and everything associated with it. There's a lot of risk there for you to go from 6 trucks to 12 trucks, but there's not a lot of risk there to keep 6 trucks and then start brokering 6 loads a day. So yeah, I believe it's a huge asset. Obadiah asks, is it best to start as a dispatcher instead of a broker? I've never been a dispatcher. I'm not a big proponent of dispatching. Some people do it, and I don't begrudge them for doing it. But the reality is, there's a lot of limitations as a dispatcher if you're doing it legally based on the ruling and guidelines from the FMCSA. They came down with those rules in this last year, and they were very specific about it. If you are acting as a dispatcher but are actually brokering loads without an authority, it's a $10,000 fine per incident. So you dispatch 10 loads in a week and they deem you as operating as an unlicensed broker, that's 10 times 10, that's $100,000 fine. So the reality is brokering, is dispatching is really only half of brokering because you're only dealing on the carrier side. Dispatchers get their loads from brokers, not from shippers. As a matter of fact, dispatchers can't even go out and solicit shippers direct. That's one of the guidelines, right? So the reality is dispatchers get their loads from brokers. So they're really not selling. They don't have shipper direct relationships. Brokers control the relationships with the shippers, and they have the relationships with the carriers. So they're the middleman. So while there are some similarities and you do have to dispatch as a broker, it's really only half the job. And so, I can't tell you what's right or wrong. All I can tell you is what my students have done. And I've had many students go on to build 6, 7, 8-figure freight brokerage. You guys have heard the success stories. You've heard the testimonials. And if you haven't, go on YouTube channel. Go on my YouTube channel, which is, let me see, I'll give you the URL. Here it is. Okay. It's youtube.com/freight brokers. And you can go to success stories, freight broker success stories, student success stories in the playlist. And you can see all kinds of students that I've interviewed and have talked about their startup journey and how they went to 6, 7, 8 figures as a freight broker after taking Freight Broker Bootcamp. I don't teach dispatch. It's not something that I teach. I've been asked a million times to do it. It'd be very easy to do. I just think that why go halfway there when you can go the whole way? Let's see. Okay. Angel asks, when hiring a broker agent, is there any red flag you can share? All right. So when hiring an agent, are there any red flags? Well, the obvious hiring red flags, right? Let's say, for example, they say they're going to do X and they don't do it. So they're going to email you something. They're going to call you. They're going to show up for a meeting and they don't do it. If they can't deliver during the hiring process and they can't keep their word and honor their word and follow through on the things they say they're going to do before being hired, then they're definitely not going to do it when they get hired. So that's a huge red flag, right? So if somebody says they're going to email you in 5 minutes and then they email you the next day, that's a huge red flag. If somebody says they're going to show up for a call or a meeting at 1 p.m. and they show up at 1:10 or 1:30, or they have to reschedule the meeting, that's a red flag. Okay. So the reality is, those are a couple of red flags. Other things might be criminal history, right? You might want to run a background check on them. I ran criminal background checks on my agents, not at the early stages, but later on I did, because, being defrauded can be extremely expensive, and there's all kinds of crazy characters out there. So maybe you want to run a background check. It doesn't mean that if they have a DWI, or some traffic violation or some crime that they were involved with 20 years ago, that you're not going to hire them. But the reality is, if they just got out of prison for fraud, or if they just murdered somebody, or they, there's some sort of pending trial for child pornography, I mean, you may want to consider that, obviously, in your hiring process. So that's another red flag. People that red flag. Well, here's the thing, right? It depends on who you're targeting. If you're targeting people who have sales experience and they can't show you a history of being successful in sales, whether it be in the logistics industry or outside of the logistics industry, then that's usually a red flag. If you're not concerned with sales experience and you're really, you're either going to train them and you're going to take that role, or, you're not worried if they lie, they're not going to survive, which is probably not a good strategy. That's another red flag. People that have never been trained in freight brokerage, they have never went through a freight broker training program. They don't understand the fundamentals of supply and demand. They don't understand equipment types. They don't understand the different freight niches. They don't understand how to do rates. If they don't understand some of those fundamentals, it could be a tough road and you might just be wasting your time. So those could be some red flags. So I hope that helps. Okay. Mickey asked, Dennis, by your opinion, what can we expect in 2024 as a freight brokerage startup? Kind of struggling right now to find new shippers. Okay. Well, put it this way. Here's the thing. We're coming off from record high freight tonnage, record high sales and revenues and profits for freight brokers. Record high. And I mean, I've been in the industry since 2003. So we're talking, that's 20 years. Okay. So the reality is we're coming off this big high and the market has settled down and is starting to flatten out. So the reality is where we are now is probably where we were 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. But guess what? Nobody was crying wolf. Nobody was saying that we were going to go out of business, right? So the reality is that prior to COVID, brokers were still making money. Agents were still making money. New brokers were still coming online. All right. The reality is that the market is doing a correction right now because there were too many carriers that joined the market and too many carriers that joined the market. And so ultimately we're finding a correction in the supply and demand, the loads to truck ratio. And that's what the market is doing right now. That's what the free market does. When there's not enough demand, supply goes away. When there's not enough supply, right? When there's not enough supply, demand comes up. And so that's the reality of how it works. So to get into your question a little bit deeper, we're in 2023. If I could predict the future, I'd be like, what's his face? I can't remember, but ultimately, I'd win all the lotteries. I'd pick the winner in every football game. But the reality is that from what I see, my opinion, the freight market has seen the worst of it from the decline. It's settling out. I think that what's happening with the economy, some of that's going to be determined obviously by world events and oil prices and those sorts of things. But I think ultimately what's going to end up happening is the government, the Fed, is going to bring down interest rates. Good, bad, or indifferent. They're going to bring down interest rates. They're probably going to do quantitative easing again. They're going to accumulate more debt. but that is going to create a boom in the economy like it did from 2000, after the 2008 crisis, from like 2010 to 2020, those 10 years that we had a huge boom. And so I think we're going to see another boom like that. I don't know how long it'll last as far as the boom, but the reality is what you have to understand, to the victor goes the spoils, right? If you as a startup with very little overhead, okay, can't survive during this, during this downturn, then there's a problem with your plan or the skills you have to execute that plan. If you're having a hard time getting customers, right, then it's a skills issue, partially a skills issue, okay? Chances are, because the reality is I've got new brokers, new students, I've got new and old students that are getting new customers every day, every week. The reality is, for whatever reason, you're running into challenges right now. That's the reason why I put together the Freight Broker Sales Accelerator. I'm not saying anything about you personally, but the reality is, yes, it's harder now to get customers than it was at the peak of the market. At the peak of the market, it was like shooting fish in a barrel. But you got to understand, those markets never last in any industry. The reality is you need to be able to have the sales strategies, tactics, tools, and more importantly, the entire system to generate and retain customers in any market conditions, up or down. And that's the reason why I put together the entire Freight Brokers. That's why I launched the Freight Broker Sales Accelerator program. Trust me, I said for 10 years I wasn't going to do it because I didn't want to do the whole coaching program. I knew it was going to take me hundreds of hours to develop the program, and it did. Now, in hindsight, I'm glad that I did it. I've been able to help a lot of people. I think we've had maybe close to 700 people that have went through that program. The average rating for students that exit that program is a 9.2 out of 10. Okay. So the reality is that it's been a phenomenal program. It's been a ton of work, but it's helped a lot of people. So the reason why I put together that Freight Broker Sales Accelerator is that skills gap, because sales is the skill that pays the bills, right? I mean, you can know how to rate, and you can know how to develop relationships with carriers, and you can know how to dispatch, and you can know how to use load boards and all that, which is important. But if you can't sell, you're going nowhere fast. Learning how to get shippers is the most important skill you will ever learn in any business, hands down. I don't care whether you're working as a W-2 employee or you're the owner, operator, whatever the case may be. So yeah, if you guys are curious about the Sales Accelerator, get on the wait list. It's sold out right now. Again, it's sold out. I think this week will be the 4th week of the Sales Accelerator. The most recent group that we put together, put through that. And we'll be reopening it in the new year, but you got to get on the wait list. If you're not on the wait list, you'll never even get a chance to enroll because it sells out every time. Okay, Ray asks, what's the average freight broker margin on a short haul and profit margin on a long haul? Okay, so I'm going to give you the whole. If you average all of the truckload freight together, long, short, medium, okay, the average profit margin historically is for a freight broker is approximately 15%. That means on $1,000 to the shipper, paying the carrier $850, you're making $150 per load. That is the full truckload statistical average if you take a look at the last 10 years, hypothetically, right? Just take the 10 up markets, down markets, the whole thing, it's going to be about 15%. Okay, so the range is typically between 10 to 20. Now, mathematically, you have to consider this. If you're doing long haul, right, and you've got a coast to coast movement that you're charging $10,000 for or $8,000 for, let's say it's $8,000 from coast to coast, just a hypothetical, right? 10% of 8,000 is $800 versus 15% of 1,000, which was $150. Which would you rather make? Well, the reality is you'd rather make $800, 10% on an $8,000 load. The challenge is there's not as many $8,000 loads as there are $1,500 loads or $1,000 loads, right? There's more local and regional movements than there are long hauls. Now, there's still a lot of long hauls, don't get me wrong. But the reality is shippers do their absolute best to not have to do long haul freight. Logistically and through their supply chain, they try to reduce that supply chain on the last mile, particularly when it comes to long haul trucking. So those are kind of give you some averages. Long haul stuff might be 5 to 10%. Short haul stuff, the stuff that's where it's, 150 miles, 200 miles, 300 miles, 400 miles, that sort of stuff inside of a few hundred miles where it's a day trip, it might be 20 or 30%. But the average, and if you take a $600 movement and you put 30, 20% on it, that's only $120. But the reality is there's a lot more of those. So I hope that makes sense for you and everybody listening. So hope that answers the question. Okay, Matthew Lopez asks, I found that a lot of shippers have gone to FOB or customer routed options. You have to call. I've been doing this for 6 weeks and I've had an average of 3 loads a week since week 2. All right, cool. So you've got some shippers that are moving freight in your first few weeks. That's great. It's not where you want it, but you're getting there. And so the reality is you started making some traction. You started learning what's working. Now, when it comes to customer routed, here's the thing you have to understand. I know you're calling a manufacturer, producer, distributor, somebody who makes and needs to ship a product. Let's call it a widget company. Okay. You're calling widget companies, and some of those companies are telling you that everything is customer routed. What that means is that the widget company's customer who's buying the product, let's say it's a retail location, right? And they are controlling the freight. So the reality is that customer of the guy you're calling is required to pick that freight up at his dock, and he's controlling the freight bill. So the reality is that, whether you're the customer, whether you're the originator or you're the customer, it all depends on who you're calling. Because if you'd have been calling the guy who was the buyer of the product, the retailer or the wholesaler or the distributor, well, then they would have been responsible for the product. So every industry is a little different. Sometimes manufacturers do FOB origin, which means you're required, if you're buying my product, I put it on the dock, you take care of it from there. And at that point, I'm not responsible. Some people do what's called FOB delivered pricing, which means they will provide pricing for that truckload of product delivered through to your location. And as soon as it gets off the truck, then they're responsible for it. Okay. So FOB origin, FOB destination really comes down to who you're calling, the types of companies that you're calling, the industry that you're calling, the size of the companies you're calling. So I think you need to hone in on some of the sales intelligence and market intelligence that you've gathered over the last 6 weeks and identify the types of companies that are actually responsible for the freight bills versus just a bunch of companies on a list. And then hone in on the companies that are actually responsible in paying the freight bills. So just like the ones that you've been able to garner, you said you've been able to do 3 loads a week since week 2. Congrats. That's amazing. Keep me posted on your success and how things are going. All right, I'm scrolling. Give me a chance. I'm looking at some questions. All right, let me look. Okay, question from Tamika. As a new broker, should you build relationships with the carriers and look for loads that they can carry in normal lanes? This is the old question, the chicken or the egg, right? Should I go after carriers and then try to find freight for those carriers, or should I go after shippers and then find carriers for those loads? some people argue this concept, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. There's just a preference and a different style. I suggest and prefer you finding the freight and then backfilling the carriers. Here's why. Because let's say my niche when I first started as a freight broker was Northeast van freight, New York, PA, New Jersey, up through New England, that originated in that area, that region, that went west or south. That's the only type of freight I did, and it was on a van. If it was coming inbound or it was somewhere else in the country, I didn't do it. So the reality is, had I been calling a bunch of carriers all over the country and trying to develop relationships with them, they may or may not have ever been in the Northeast, right? Just because I call somebody in Atlanta doesn't mean they come to Northeast. They may have went to the West Coast. They may be local. They may go to the Southwest, whatever the case may be. So I prefer, and I teach starting with the freight. Find shippers, okay, that have freight, understand the needs, understand the demand, understand the rates, and then find carriers to fill those lanes. And that's how you'll build your carrier database. Every load that you do, every first time you do a load with a carrier is the first time you do a load with a carrier. But your job and the key to success long-term is for you to then develop a relationship with that carrier so that anytime that lane comes back up, that they'll be on the list of people to call so you can start using them regularly and you can start building a stable of carriers that you're consistently using rather than pulling a new carrier off a load board every time. But we all start at the same place. We have no shipper relationships. We have no carrier relationships. We've got to start somewhere. So Tamika, my preference, and I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you what I did. And I'm telling you what I know a lot of other brokers have done that have went through my program and otherwise. Started with freight and then brought the carriers on based upon those specific freight needs, not based upon just randomly calling carriers, developing relationships and hoping that you can reach out and build shipper relationships with those carriers. So again, your choice, but that's my feedback. Anonymous. Can you give general examples of how to build rapport with customers? Okay, well, how would you build rapport? My question to you is, how would you build rapport with anybody that you just met anywhere in the world? Let's say you went to a party. Let's say you were in an airport. Let's say you were at an event and you met somebody, okay? Somebody introduced you and or you met somebody somehow. How would you build rapport with that person? So here's what you don't do because it turns everybody off. When you make it all about yourself, and these are just, you ask for general examples. When you make it all about yourself, that person is going to lose interest very, very quick. And it speaks volume when you make it all about you. Now, on the other side of the coin, if you make it all about them and you make them feel special and you make them feel like they've been heard and you make them feel like you understand them, all right, and that you have some things in common, that's how you build rapport. So that's a general example, okay? That's a very high level example. So a little bit more specific. Let me give you some easy things that you can do to build rapport. The number one thing you have to do is gather sales intelligence. Now, sales intelligence is data that you gather about the company, about the product, about the industry, and about the person, the actual contact, the shipping manager. You gather that sales intelligence, that information. The stuff about the person, the shipping manager might be where they went to college, where are they located geographically, how long have they been with the company, what did they do prior to the company, what are some things that they've posted on social media recently, what are some things that they've engaged with on social media recently, what are some recent press releases, what are some groups that they belong to, what are some things that what is their favorite sports team? Okay, so Those are things, those are the types of sales intelligence that you can gather and then leverage as a part of your outreach. See, what you have to understand, and I've said this many, many times, the best salespeople, the most successful salespeople are not the smoothest talkers. They're not the people who make the most calls. They're the most educated. And I don't mean formal education. I'm not talking about getting your bachelor's degree or your MBA. That's really almost irrelevant. What I'm talking about is the most educated about the niche, the industry, the customer, and the prospect. The more educated you are there, and the more you can take that data and that education and you can leverage it into a compelling sales hook, which is a big part of what we teach in the Freight Broker Sales Accelerator. The more you can leverage it into building rapport, the more we can leverage it into building that know, like, and trust that's required. Those are the people that succeed, right? So when I was first taught sales, it's really funny. I'm going to give you a funny analogy, then I'm going to wrap it up. One of the easiest ways to build rapport is to find something that you have in common. When I was raised, when I first got into sales, they said you had to find the deer head on the wall. So for example, if you were doing door-to-door sales, just hypothetically, just bear with me here. You're not doing door-to-door sales, but just a hypothetical. You knocked on the door, the guy answered the door, and all of a sudden you looked in and there was a deer head on the wall in his living room and you noticed it was a nice buck. You're probably not going to talk about golf. You're probably not going to make a comment about fast cars. You're probably not going to make a comment about football. What you're going to talk about is you're going to say, oh, that's a great buck. I went hunting with my grandfather last year and he shot an amazing deer, maybe a little bit smaller than that. And that is an example of what I call finding the deer head on the wall. So you're finding some common ground. An easy way to do that. I've done it, and I know a lot of freight brokers, especially men who are into sports, football and hockey and things of that nature. They'll use sports. They'll use their hobbies. They'll use those affinities that they have as a bridge between. I'll give you a perfect example. My first customer that I ever got using LinkedIn 100 years ago, it seems like. I joined LinkedIn back in 2008, got my first customer back in, I think, 2008 using LinkedIn. And what the whole thing that hit it off for us was he was in the Philadelphia area. I'm in the Buffalo area, and we started talking about the Buffalo-Philly rivalry in football. And that's how we started the conversation, right? That was how we started the conversation. So the reality is that those conversations then led to rapport, which led to a shipper that ultimately ended up doing, I think, lifetime value over $600,000 in business with us. Now, they weren't a huge shipper, but we did business with them for a long time. So, I'm giving you a bit of a brain dump, but I'm hoping you might be able to replay this and listen to it again. And hopefully that'll make a little bit of sense and you'll be able to pull a couple nuggets out of there. All right, we're going to wrap it up here in a minute. I'm already past the hour. I'm already late. Okay, here's a question from Luke. Dennis, when you started your freight brokerage, did you do any advertising other than doing a multi-channel phone, email, link outreach? No, we didn't do any marketing. Well, advertising. Let me take that back. What we did do, we built a website, and then on that website, we started creating content, blog posts, videos, things of that nature, not maybe in 2003, 2004, but shortly afterwards. So we did a lot of digital marketing. Early on, we started doing a lot of digital marketing because I had an affinity for it. I was learning it. I was interested in it. And I thought that it was the future. And fortunately, it was. So we did a lot of digital marketing, but we didn't do a lot of paid type advertising. We didn't advertise in trade journals. We didn't go set up big booths at trade shows. We didn't do direct mail. I mean, we did some marketing, but early on, it wasn't a big part of what we were doing. We were much more sales oriented than marketing oriented as a startup. And over time, we took some of those profits that we generated from sales and we reinvested them into marketing. And some of those marketing campaigns gave great ROIs and other ones didn't. Let me give you a perfect example. I don't know what year it was. Probably, I don't know, it was probably, I don't know, maybe 2008, somewhere between 2008, maybe 2008 to 2010. We did a webinar. I did a webinar, and we did some marketing, some co-marketing with other people who had big email lists. And we ended up doing a bunch of marketing around that webinar. We promoted it for like several weeks. And I think we had maybe about 900 people registered for that webinar. Okay. I delivered the webinar, and the leads that were generated from that one webinar, you guys are going to find this hard to believe, but this is 100% true. Cross my heart, hope to die, stick a needle in my eye. Okay. So this is 100% true. The leads that were generated from that one webinar that we tracked out, because I had my marketing manager track it out over the next year, the leads that were generated from that one webinar generated over $5 million in revenue for the company. So leads that were generated within 1 year afterwards, those companies that had come on board, those individuals that had come on board, had generated over $5 million in annual recurring revenue. So obviously that was an extremely successful campaign, but that shows you the difference between just selling and marketing. And it is an important lesson. In startup mode, I think obviously there's much more emphasis on selling, because obviously sales can have, or marketing can be, not every marketing campaign works, right? And most startups don't have a lot of marketing background. If you've got an interesting background in marketing and you know how to acquire customers cost effectively in the B2B space, it might be the right decision for you to have a little bit more of a hybrid. So I hope that helps. All right, guys, listen, I'm going to wrap it up for today, but I want to get your feedback. We had a couple critics early on. Based on the training, based on the Q&A, did I deliver 1 to 10? 1 meaning, Dennis, this sucked. You wasted my time and I'll never be back. 10 meaning, yes, thank you so much. I gathered a lot of great information from this and you hit it out of the park. Anything in between would be appreciated. If you're giving me anything less than an 8, tell me why. Okay, just give me something that I can use as constructive feedback to make these lives better, to make your experience better, to make the program better, and to deliver for you, because that's ultimately why I'm here, right? You notice there was no credit card for you to get into this training, right? There was no paywall, there was no credit card, there was no admissions fee. The price of admission is for you to hit the like button right now, share the stream, and then give me that feedback 1 to 10 on whether I delivered. And again, remember, one of the cool things about me, my superpower, is the fact that I have a rhino-like skin. I have super thick skin. If you tell me that something sucked and you give me a real constructive reason why, I probably will agree with you, and I'll take that, internalize it, and then I'll try to improve. That's how I work. So don't worry. I don't need you to placate my ego. I just want honest feedback. And old, young, if you gave me a 6, that's cool. Thank you for the feedback. Tell me why. What can I do different? Why do you feel as though it was a 6 when other people feel as though it was a 9 or 10 or more? Okay. Matthew, the shippers list is updated every 12 to 24 months, depending. I think it's due for an update. The data is only as valuable as I can purchase it, right? And can be at times some are outdated. The reality is this. If you want to see an understanding of the value of data, go to zoominfo.com. The ZoomInfo is kind of the premier B2B sales data company. They are. That's just the reality. Okay. The price tiers to get into that sales accelerator, or not the price tiers to get into ZoomInfo for sales leads as a B2B. Okay. Start at $14,000 a year and go up to unlimited, but they have packages, I think up to $40,000 or $50,000 a year per user. Okay. That's not, for an entire company. $14,000 a year is the starting point for data. Now, I don't have the same data as they have. That's the reality. If I did, I surely wouldn't give it away for free. Okay. But I get very good data. We update it on a regular basis. We have custom, it does, like any industry, that data is only as good as the day that you get it, because from that date forward, the data is going to change. Websites are going to change, contacts are going to change, phone numbers are going to change, emails are going to change, companies are going to go out of business. All that stuff happens. So we've made it a practice every couple of years of updating that data, and I think it's due for an update. So I'll put that on the list to make sure we check it. And appreciate you guys. Appreciate you guys being here. Have an awesome day. Make sure you hit the like button no matter where you're at. And if you're curious about becoming a freight broker, check out freightbrokerbootcamp.com. 60-day, 100% unconditional money back guarantee. Appreciate you guys being here. Have an awesome day. See you next Monday for the next Freight Broker Bootcamp Live.